Live from beyond the Beltway, this is Bruce DuMont with our weekly analysis of national politics with occasional injections of rumor and innuendo, all offered up by our panel of political insiders, pundits, power brokers, public servants, professors, and most importantly, plain-speaking Americans from coast to coast. Tonight featuring commentary by Democrat Richard Boykin, independent conservative and author Jason Hill, and in our second hour, Democrat Rebecca Abraham and Republican Doug Ibendahl. Our program tonight coming to you from our home base at WCGO in Evanston, Illinois. Nice to have you with us wherever you're listening from coast to coast and border to border. We got lots to talk about. It was another jam-packed week of news. And we're going to begin with our guests in hour number one, and they are Richard Boykin, who is a Democrat. He's a former commissioner of the Cook County Board of Commissioners in the city of Chicago. And also Jason Hill joins us. Jason is an independent conservative. He is from DePaul University. He is a professor of philosophy, and he is author of the book, We Have Overcome, an immigrant's letter to the American people. We'll talk about that as the program unfolds this evening. I want to begin with you, Jason, and get your reaction and get your thought about how the movement that began with the death of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police officers, how that has morphed into all of the other protests, some violent, around the United States. Is there some way that the subject will get back to George Floyd, or has it already been hijacked?
Well, you know, the death of George Floyd was tragic, and the police officer has been arrested and charged with murder. Mm-hmm. And I think that in the beginning there were legitimate, peaceful protests against the unlawful way in which he was handled. I think, however, what has happened is that a bunch of nihilists and anarchists have taken advantage of this tragic and unfortunate death and have hijacked the peaceful protest movements. And we see the remnants of postmodernist philosophy manifesting itself in the streets. When you see vandalism running amok in our streets, when you see statues of white abolitionists and black union fighters being torn down with impunity and with the same degree of aplomb and without discrimination as slave traders and slave owners, you know that there's nihilism running amok.
Richard, I want to get Richard's response to the same question, Richard. It has evolved. I know initially you were very concerned about what happened in Minneapolis, but that seems to be a story that appears to be very much in the rearview mirror for a lot of Americans at the moment.
Well, Bruce, thank you for having me on. And let me first of all say that what happened to George Floyd is unacceptable, and it's happening too often to too many Black men and Latinos all across the country. And so what this is it's really, I think, a fight for freedom. I mean, I think that people have been fighting ever since the Emancipation Proclamation, Bruce, for freedom and for equity and for liberty. I think that they're fighting just to be able to live the American dream, quite frankly.
But Richard, when crowds gather, whether it's in Portland, to deface a federal building and create havoc and in the streets, or whether it's a group of people that decide they're going to tear down the statue of Christopher Columbus and tear down a statue of George Washington in other cities, and Andrew Jackson, or at least attempts in Washington, D.C. I mean, that isn't necessarily about police brutality and the treatment of Black men in America today.
Well, I think, look, now, I think that people are trying to figure out how do we move these symbolic things like the Confederate flag and others. How do we take those things down and put up positive things in their place? I'm not for symbolism, quite frankly. I'm more for substance. I'd rather see us make sure that we have Black folks on corporate boards and people in boardrooms and vice presidents and presidents of companies. I want to make sure that we don't miss this moment and focus purely on symbolic things and miss the substance.
Is a Democrat candidate for vice president who happens to be African American and a woman at this moment in time. Is that just symbolism in your mind, or is it significant?
Well, I think it's significant because there has not been a Black vice president in the United States of America. And so, quite frankly, I think that it's more than symbolism, and and that person will serve a major role. Quite frankly, President Joe Biden, hopefully soon to be President Joe Biden, he's up in age, and if something happens to him, that vice president must step into his shoes and become president. That's why it's major.
I want to come back to that a little bit later, but I want to go back to you, Jason, and talk about again where the dialogue is now. And it seems to me there's a lot of conflating of these issues by the media to some extent, or to a large extent, and also by Democrats and those that dislike the president. I mean, it's getting confusing.
The dialogue about what?
The confusion that's out there when people initially were upset about what happened in Minneapolis, but now you've got the situation in Portland, you've got the situation
yes.
tearing down
right.
stadiums. I mean, how do we get back to the core issue here?
Well, I respect Richard's point, but I think I fail to see how this is a cry for freedom when blacks and white protesters are burning down Black-owned businesses as well, and burning down the businesses of white people who employ Black people. So this is why I think that this is a form of nihilism, and that has run amok. I think that Black Lives Matter, the movement itself, I mean, the lives of Black people matter, but I think Black Lives Matter movement, and I've written extensively about this movement, is really, truly a problematic phenomenon, because it has at its heart of its charter the destruction of U.S. banks, the advancement of socialism. It's a culturally Marxist movement. It is profoundly anti-American, and it is fueling a lot of the rage. What it lacks is, what these riots and these protesters lack is the equivalent of a Martin Luther King, someone with a strong moral voice that can focus morally and consistently on what the real issue is. What we have in the street.
I want to go back to. I want to make this as much of a conversation as possible. So I want to go back to you, Richard, and have you offer your assessment of Jason's assessment of the Black Lives Movement as being a Marxist movement.
Well, I would say this, that I think the gentleman has it wrong. I think the riots that we've seen in American cities really are a cry for freedom. They're the cry of those who've been neglected. They're the cry of those whose communities have been disinvested in. I mean, when you look at Chicago and you look all over Detroit and other places, there's been major disinvestment in these cities, and especially in the Black community.
But Richard, if you're judging this movement by what you see on television, and I think a lot of people do judge it because that's where they're getting a lot of their news, what they're seeing and what I'm seeing is you've got a bunch of white kids out there. You've got a bunch of white kids, primarily anarchists, that are in Portland. You've got those that were protesting outside Mayor Lightfoot's house the other day. The vast majority of them were white. I want to get your reaction to that, and also back to Jason Hill as well when we continue on Beyond the Beltway.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
A line is a powerful thing. It connects the global economy to your living room. Cleaner air to stronger markets. Factory floors to less crowded roads. Today's progress to tomorrow's promise. Norfolk Southern. One line, infinite possibilities.
DuMont back on Beyond the Beltway. When the president said last week he was going to send in some federal agents to Chicago and Albuquerque in the wake of the violence that was taking place in those cities, which are not necessarily related to any of the demonstrations and violence, but it was the violence of those people that are killed every weekend in Chicago and also in Albuquerque. There was initial response from the media and obviously some of those on the left that thought this was a horrible idea. It was a police state. Everyone thought that it was going to be a repeat of what has happened in Portland, where people have described the federal agents in a like Gestapo and stormtroopers, as the speaker said. But to you, Richard, because you were once an elected official in the county of Cook. You also were a longtime associate of Congressman Danny Davis, which is the west side of Chicago. So you know that there's a lot of crime that exists in that area and in areas of Chicago. When the average person on the street that lives in those areas, how do you think they react when they hear the president say, we're going to send some people in to try to clean up and reduce some of this violence?
Well, Bruce, first, let me say this. When white people join the movement and when they get out there and start protesting and putting their lives on the line, I think that's when America actually takes notice and says something has to happen. Heretofore, I mean, all you have was basically African Americans out protesting and nobody really cared. Police brutality is not something that just happened with George Floyd. Right. It's happened long before that. And so, but something struck a chord with him and how the officer had his knee on his neck for so long. Mm-hmm. Now, with respect to violence and the president, I'm happy that the president sent in federal assistance. What he sent in is 200 agents that will be part of the U.S. Attorney's Office, part of the FBI, part of the ATF, to really go after guns and to go after drugs and gangs. And I'm excited about it. I've talked to a number of people on the west side and south sides of Chicago. All they want is safe neighborhoods. They want the same thing people downtown, South Loop, West Loop. They want safe neighborhoods. Black children, black men have been getting slaughtered for the last 20 years. In the last 10 years, Bruce, there have been more than 20,000 black people shot in the city of Chicago. Mm-hmm. That is criminal because nobody ever really stood up and said, hey, we got to stop this genocide that's taking place on the west and south sides of Chicago. It is unheard of in America that you have 70 people shot almost every weekend in the summer in Chicago. That is unacceptable. And so I'm pleased, and a lot of people are pleased that the president has sent these extra resources in to solve some of these crimes that haven't been solved.
Jason, do you see it that way, or are you comfortable with the fact that the president the other night said that he could send 50 to 75,000 troops, which again got everybody got everybody in their tied their everybody's shorts. But
I wrote an open letter to the president 2 years ago, which went viral, and I was on the media circuit talking about this, asking him actually to suspend posse comitatus and to send troops in and to invoke the use of the National Guard, because we have these feral thugs that are taking the good citizens of the south side of Chicago, whom I teach in my classroom, hostage. And so I think it's a long time coming. I want to see boots on the ground. We know where these gang members are. It's not like Osama bin Laden or Saddam Hussein, like they're hiding under a rock. We know where they are. They need to be rooted out. They're feral creatures that are holding the good citizens and obliterating communities on the south side of Chicago. So I think, to the short answer to the question, long time coming, and it's a welcome gesture.
Last week when we had this discussion, I received a Facebook comment from a regular listener who described himself, at least that's how he described himself, and he said, you're missing the boat on some things, and I live in those communities, and I want to offer my 2 cents. So I reached out to him. His name is Willie Preston, and I've reached out to him, and I understand he's on the line now. So, Willie, we bring you into the conversation and bring us up to date, just in response to my last question. Do those who live on the south and west sides, do they appreciate the beefing up of federal authorities to try to reduce crime in your neighborhoods?
Well, first, I'd like to say, obviously, there is no 100% anybody could poll the South and West Sides. But by and large, I have been completely shocked at folks who completely oppose the president and everything he does. But they have all been calling for the president to get involved because they are tired of seeing children getting shot. As a lot of us have learned to see, have recognized as of late, children are literally getting their faces shot off on the south and west sides of Chicago. So I have saw people who fundamentally oppose everything the president does, praying for him to come out and get involved and engage the ground, because the local police department, as hard and tirelessly as they are working, and some could argue against that, but they have.
By the way, on that,
they're not able to stop it.
On that political point, Willie, and again, if you're a longtime listener, I think we can turn back the clock 4 or 6 years, because what was happening when Barack Obama was president for 8 years, and there was this the epidemic of violence in Chicago happened. It began way back then, and I was always amazed that that president, didn't use the bully pulpit as well as the executive order pen to send more troops into Chicago to stop crime there. And again, there were a lot of people who were very much for the president that didn't join me in that call. So I'm frankly fine. I'm really glad that it has happened. I don't know whether I would go as far as Professor Hill in suggesting that we want troops on every corner, but how would you feel about that? I mean, going the step further as Professor Hill suggested.
No, because the reason why I would be opposed to that, and I think many people on both the South and West Sides be opposed to that, is because that would put the majority of the citizens of Chicago in an even more police state, and subject those of us who are law-abiding citizens to being treated like criminals. But even more importantly, that would not get at the root cause of this issue. Why I personally would support the president bringing in federal resources is because we have to track down the pipeline of these guns. We have to break up these small networks of young people inside of our communities that are engaged on a day-by-day basis in gun violence. And when we look at the homicide rate, clearance rate, with it being continuously low, what we are recognizing within our own communities in Inglewood, Auburn, Gresham, is that we have allowed young people to shoot and get away with murder literally continuously, and that is what we need to stop.
But let me ask. I'm going to ask you, but I want to get reaction from our guests, and then I want to come back to you for a final word on it, Willie, because as someone who watches the news every single night in Chicago, and again, for the most part, it leads with a story of some shooting on the South or West Side, or the crime spree where 15 people were shot outside the funeral home. The question is, rarely, if ever, does anybody see anything within the black community. And it's always been explained to me by police officers who I've known over the years, is that black people are scared to death to step up and point a finger and see anything and tell the cops, because they're worried that someone's going to come back, a gangbanger is going to come back and kill them. And in the last 5 days, there's been a repeat of something that people in Chicago have known about for a long time. There is an estimated 150,000 gang members in Chicago. Now, with 150,000 people, if you buy that figure, Richard Boykin, how on earth are you ever going to get the community to have the guts to stand up and point fingers at someone, because the finger that is being pointed may be of a next door neighbor, and there'll be retaliation? How do you break that cycle?
Well, you break the cycle by making sure that you have law enforcement working with the community that the community trusts. Quite frankly, what happens is many people in the community feel like law enforcement is part of the problem. They feel like some of them are like John Burge and others, who are basically on the take and stuff. And so, but I also would say this, Bruce, that,
by the way, for those listening around the country, John Burge was a longtime police commander in Chicago, who has since passed away, but he was notorious for the brutal treatment of blacks and for basically beating confessions out of them. But that's who he was,
Sure.
Who you referenced. Go ahead.
He tortured them. But the other thing is this: if the president would deal, along with working with the mayor, the governor, the county board president, with the root causes of this violence, which is poverty, which is single parent homes. Everything begins in the home. So parents need to have the support that they need in order to be able to raise their children. If we will deal with these things like housing, wealth inequality, all of these things, and making sure that we deal with the food deserts that we have.
All right, let's go to Jason. You're coming. Let's make this conversational and fewer lectures if we can. Let me go to you, Professor Hill, and talk about the litany of basic things that create an atmosphere of potential crime. But that's going to take decades or generations to fix. But we really can't wait that long, can we?
No, we can't wait that long. And look, and these problems started in the 1960s with the massive welfare programs that disincentivized, working fathers.
And you don't disagree with it. You don't disagree with any of them, do you?
No, I disagree with that. These problems.
But no. I want to go back. I want to go back to the professor, and then we're going to come back to you. But right now, we have to pause because you can hear the music playing. That means that we've got to go.
Here's how you can make your own face covering in a few easy steps with items you can find around the house, like an old scarf, a bandana or a hand towel, or you can make a face covering out of an old t-shirt. Fold it to the middle from the bottom. Fold it to the middle from the top. Fold it again to the middle from the bottom, and again from the top. And then 2 rubber bands, one on one side and one on the other side. Then you fold either side to the middle, and you have yourself cloth face covering. It's that easy.
Meet George Jetson. His boy Elroy.
With instant acceleration, electric cars are more fun to drive and more affordable than ever. Electric cars are here. Plug in to the present.
Bruce DuMont back on Beyond the Beltway, and we're going to take a moment and let each of our guests take a moment to introduce themselves, and we begin with Richard Boykin. Go ahead, Richard.
Well, thank you very much, Bruce, for having me. I spent 13 years in Washington, D.C., working for 3 members of Congress. I spent 13 years at Barnes & Thornburg as a partner and served on the Cook County Board for 4 years, and now opened up my own law consulting firm. It's been open all of maybe 3 months.
Okay. And Jason Hill, let's have your background.
Thank you for having me, Bruce. I was born and raised in Jamaica and came to America at the age of 20. I have a PhD in philosophy. I'm a professor of philosophy, author of about 6 books. And I'm also the host of a radio show in Chicago every Saturday morning. And I write a number of columns for about 6 different magazines. Mm-hmm. And I really take myself to be not just an academic, but a public intellectual who specializes in American political thought and ethics and psychology.
Where's your show? Tell us where your show is.
It's at WCGO Chicago every Saturday morning in Evanston.
Very good. We know it very well. That's where we do this program from. I want to go back to the final word. Willie Preston was on the phone, and he lives on the south or west side of Chicago. And Willie, I'm going to give you the final word on what you hope happens next and the reaction you think your neighbors will have with whatever that action is.
I'd just like to say on the terms of retaliation, Bruce, that there was a woman recently killed a week later after she testified in open court.
Yes. And
so to the point that you made earlier, there is a culture here of folks not being able to speak up without having to volunteer their life. And that is also a reason why we should bring in the feds to disrupt those type of acts. Perhaps some type of real coordination between the Cook County State's Attorney and the U.S. office. Perhaps relocation of people who step up and courageously speak up to end this violence. But I'd like to see happen.
Would you agree with what Richard Boykin said, that part of the concern also is that a lot of people just don't trust the police that they're going to be able to tell their story to?
No, I actually don't. And the reason why is because while there is a mistrust of the police, there's also a greater desire for people to have their children go outside the hot summer day like it is today in Chicago and get wet. And I think that that'll be the greater advantage if folks believe that they could actually get rid of a killer and not be killed.
You came up with an idea, so stay on the line because I do want to ask our other guests. I'm going to start with you, Jason Hill. Willie suggested that maybe some form of a witness protection program could be set up in counties around the country where the problem of testifying against gangsters or gangbangers would work. Do you think that's a viable thing to explore?
Look, I think we need to get rid of these gang members first. Look, we know where they are. We have a derelict mayor in this city. I'm not a Republican. I'm a conservative independent who will not enforce the law. We need to get rid of these gang members. We know where they are. They're not hiding under a rock. So before we start talking about a witness protection program, we need to eliminate the gang members. Yes, they are.
Don't you have to get evidence that they've done something wrong, though? I mean,
yes. Well, I don't see why the two are mutually exclusive. But we first need to enforce our efforts on locating them, right? Strategically placing agents, which is why I am for boots on the ground, because you need a lot of manpower to locate them.
Richard,
to identify them.
Do you see it as easily as Jason has suggested?
Jason's got to come out the ivory tower. Let me tell you
Look, I mentored people on the south side of Chicago. You don't know my background. I've mentored kids from the east side of St. Louis, Ku Klux Klan members on the cornfields of Southern Illinois. I'm not just an ivory tower academic. I've gone to the south side. I've led mentorship programs for Black males. So, I'm not, don't paint me as some sort of, ivory tower figure who hasn't. I've gone to Peru. I've gone to Mexico. I've volunteered.
And he doesn't have a point. He doesn't have
not just Black people of color. So
he doesn't have a pointed head either.
That painting of me of just an academic who doesn't know the real world.
Go ahead, Richard.
Bruce, the point. Let me finish the point. So Willie said that we need witness protection program. We already have it. There is a witness protection program. Quite frankly, it's not funded nearly where it needs to be, where you can relocate witnesses and that sort of thing. So what I
who knows about it, Richard? Who knows about it? I've lived in this city for 50 years. I don't know about it.
It's part of the state's attorney's office. It's also part of the U.S. attorney's office. They got funding for it, but they don't have enough funding.
Well, Willie, I would say that Willie, I would say if there's a message that everyone can maybe agree on from this conversation is, Willie, you've come up with an idea that already exists, but I don't think most of your neighbors know about it. I hope you agree with me on that. Maybe you don't. Do you think most of your neighbors know that there's an existing witness protection program run under the state's attorney's office and the U.S. attorney's office in Illinois? Willie?
Perception is reality, then we understand the reality is that program doesn't exist for all intents and purposes. Because no, to your question, no one knows it exists. The reality is I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So the reality is, Mr. Boykin, if that program indeed exists, and I have no reason to challenge you that it does, then we absolutely need to put forth a stronger and greater effort to stand that program up even more by increased funding and putting out and investing in public service announcements to make sure that the general public understands that. My neighbors talk amongst each other, and I can tell you to the professor, the greatest asset to the police department from their lips to my ears, and from prosecutors across the country in major cities like Chicago, is that they need community support, that they need folks to speak up. And if we could come up again with the federal government working in conjunction with the city and county, we could really turn a leaf over on this gun violence, because the community would be speaking up on these efforts. Because you know who knows the shooters in this community? My neighbors, the people who witness it every day,
Right.
the people who are afraid to leave up out of their homes, and to ask them to go out and speak when we can cite several cases when folks have stepped up and been retaliated against. That's a fool's mission.
Willie,
We
listen,
need to
I
make
want
certain that-
to. We're going to move on at the moment, but I want to thank you very much
Thank you.
for sending me the Facebook post after the show last week, which is how you and I met. So I read all of my Facebook posts. You were kind enough to share a phone number so we could put you on the air, because I do think that you represent your voice that's been heard this evening. I think is replicated tens, if not hundreds of thousands of times around the United States. People that live in communities where violence is rampant. They want to do something about it. They want to improve it, but they are stymied by what exists, including the ability and the willingness of people to step up and say something and be protected and not lose their life when they do it. So it's a very complicated matter. I disagree with the president when he said that that he could clean things in Chicago easily. I don't believe that for a hoot. But again, Willie, thank you very much, and spread the word to your friends and neighbors that if they've got something to say, they can say it every Sunday night on this program. And thank you very much for tuning in to Beyond the Beltway. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Bruce. Philip Beverly put me on your show years ago as I was a student of his at Chicago State, and I haven't stopped listening since. I appreciate that.
Terrific. Well, that's great. He's a frequent guest on this program, and we say farewell to you, but we bring in Ron, listening to us in the great state of Michigan. Go ahead. You're on the air, Ron.
Thank you, Bruce. Bruce, the pastor Corey Brooks from Chicago, Lawndale neighborhood.
Yes.
He contends, when he was on WGN last week, that the Black Lives Matter movement in Chicago, but was hijacked by anarchists. And I contend, Bruce, that agent provocateurs have been in this thing since Minnesota. They've been identified as black-clad white men starting fires in Minnesota. And it's no coincidence, in my opinion, that Roger Stone had admitted agent provocateur going back to the 60s, and his network, I believe, is in operation. It stirring up the protests with violence and the destruction of the statues, and in particular in Chicago.
Okay.
And I got a possible replacement for Columbus in Little Italy in Chicago.
Yep.
Viola Luuzzo, a civil rights worker from the 60s from Detroit, who was shotgunned to death by the Ku Klux Klan.
Okay. All right. You've gone to a number of directions, but I just want to clarify your point. Your position is that you believe that agent provocateurs of the government are behind some of the violence that exists. Have I summarized your position?
Absolutely correct, Bruce.
Okay. Does anybody want to
correct.
come? I want to, again, this is out of left field or right field, but I do want to get our guests to respond to that. Professor, do you want to take a crack at whether that's a viable possibility or not?
Not really, because I don't think statements of belief should be elevated to the level of knowledge.
Okay, and
I have,
go ahead.
Yeah, and I have no criteria, no way of parsing through or adjudicating these beliefs and subjecting them to meaning tests at all.
It was something, however, that did exist back in 1968. Not at the convention, but that charge was made then, and there was some veracity to it. Quick question to you, Richard: do you believe this or not? Yes or no?
I believe that it could be possible. You allude to FBI Director Hoover, who spied on Martin Luther King Jr.
Gotta pause. Back shortly from Chicago.
Yeah.
Dallas, St. Louis, Nashville, Tuscaloosa. All major cities to feel the destruction caused by a direct hit from a tornado. Is Chicago next? It's not a question of if, but when, and the clock is ticking. Learn what to do now at ready.illinois.gov to become tornado ready.
Bruce DuMont back in Chicago. Thank you very much for joining us, actually in Evanston, Illinois, where WCGO is located. And I want to go to the professor. Professor, we mentioned that the title of your book is We Have Overcome, an Immigrant's Letter to the American People. And what is the basic point of your book, and what is it that you want the public to know about your personal experience?
The book really sort of is a love letter to the American people, and it spells out exactly what's good about America. I mean, it was a direct response to Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, Between the World and Me, in which I thought America was being attacked as an intrinsically bigoted, racist country that was bad, and intrinsically so. And I wanted to show that there's something very good about America. This is a country in which many of us can pin our aspirational identities. It's a home to immigrants such as myself who came here with $120 in his pocket. And I tell the story about the immigrants who came here and who made something remarkable of their lives. And it explains the moral meaning of America, going back to the founding of America, although it was birthed with a defect. And what do I mean by American exceptionalism? What do I mean by the exceptionist nature of the can-do spirit of the American people? So it's really a paean hymn to American exceptionalism without, in some sense, sugarcoating America's tyrannical past in many respects. The white supremacist ideology on which America was founded, there is no sugarcoating that. But in spite of all these things, we have progressed, we have made progress, we have become, we're a country that is self-correcting, that is always trying to better itself, going back to the third founding, which identifies the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the 1965 voting.
I want to get Richard an opportunity to respond to that. How much of that do you agree with or disagree with, Richard?
Well, let me just say this, that there still exists too many inequities among those who were once slaves. When the Emancipation Proclamation was signed by Abraham Lincoln, it freed the slaves. There was a promise made of 40 acres and a mule. That promise was rescinded. And so blacks have constantly been in a race for equity. The poverty levels, when you look at every social indicator in the United States and you look at where African Americans are, if it's the worst thing, we're at the height of it. When you look at poverty, when you look at unemployment, when you look at a lack of hope. And so we're just saying we need to be equitable. We need to be equal. We need our fair share of the pot. I think education is the great equalizer. I think if you gave people an opportunity to go to school, and we ought to do that to better themselves, they will better America. Quite frankly, we're not there yet. We have not made it to the promised land.
Should they have a choice? Should they have a choice where they go to school?
I think there ought to be free college education through the city colleges or through the state institutions in a state.
How about grammar school? How about the ability of a black parent to send their kid to any school they want as opposed to sending them to a local government school which may be failing them?
No, I'm all for that. I think we got to have schools that perform. I think everybody deserves an opportunity to live what we call the American dream. Quite frankly, it is not happening right now. It has not happened. And that's why you see the hue and cry throughout American streets right now, and especially from this generation that's basically saying, look, we want our fair share of the pie.
Professor?
Well, there is a point that I wanted to address that was made earlier. That is, the correlation between crime and poverty is a very recent phenomenon that emerged in the 1960s. And the crime rate among blacks during, and I'm of course not advocating segregation, during the Jim Crow era and preceding the Jim Crow era was significantly very, very low. And this idea that correlating crime with poverty, I think, is a slap in the face of the majority of black people who might live in poverty and never resort to crime. So that's one point I wanted to make. I think that I agree with Richard that, look, I should not be able to, as Condoleezza Rice has said, type your zip code in and tell what kind of education you're getting. We have a system of public funded education, and I think it's really, really unfair that it is funded primarily by property taxes. So I think, if we have money to bail out rich corporations, and we have money to bail out, give preferential treatment to rich, privileged CEOs, we can do better with our African Americans, and we can give them a better education. So I think Richard and I are on the same page there. We should really be quite ashamed that our schools are failing. I mean, I can tell you a story that when my students on the south side of Chicago cannot come to school because there's asbestos in the building and the school is closed for 8 months. I know that I live in Lincoln Park. If a public funded high school in Lincoln Park had asbestos in the building, the asbestos would be removed within 2 weeks and the school would not be closed. This is disgraceful, and that this is happening in America. And in the great city of Chicago, I think is very, very tragic.
Richard, would you say historically, let's say over the last 50, 75 years, certainly maybe within and I need a quick answer to this, have black Americans have they been well served by their elected officials, regardless of what level that official operates on?
Well, Bruce, let me first of all say it's unfair to say crime doesn't have a correlation with poverty, and look at the Jim Crow era. Quite frankly, right now what we have is guns, drugs being put into these communities like you've never seen before. And we have genocide where people aren't even having opportunities for jobs. Manufacturing had left these neighborhoods. They don't have jobs. So what do you expect them to do? They're going to turn on each other. Yes, the elected officials have failed. The elected officials' number one responsibility, Bruce, is to protect the people they represent. We failed at that mandate and that requirement.
We have to pause on that particular point. That's also something the President of the United States has got to do as well. He's trying. I think Mayor Lightfoot is trying as well, but maybe she's got to try a little bit harder. Jason Hill from DePaul University, thank you for joining us this evening. Richard Boykin, now in private practice, former Cook County Commissioner, thanks for joining us. In the next hour, we'll be joined by Rebecca Abraham and Doug Eibendahl. Don't go away.
Welcome to the world, 2116. You can fly across town in minutes, or across the globe in under an hour. Whole communities are living on Mars, and solar satellites provide Earth with unlimited clean power. In less than a century, Boeing took the world from seaplanes to space planes, across the universe and beyond. And if you thought that was amazing, you just wait.
Today, fresh fruits and vegetables will go from a field in California to a grocer in Miami. A bottle of beer from Eagle Pass will journey to a restaurant in Manhattan. A 2x4 in Oregon will find its way to a townhome in Denver. A hybrid will say goodbye to Detroit and hello to a showroom in Austin. While a steel beam will leave a mill in Illinois for a high-rise in Phoenix. And a flat screen in China will head to an electronics store in Memphis. Because today, as every day, wherever you find business, you'll find us.